Hi, everyone. Thank you for tuning in for the third episode of Neocast, the podcast that brings you closer to your favorite authors. Our guest today is Bailey Elizabeth, the author of the Rough Love series and many other standalones. To start off this interview, I'm gonna let her introduce herself.
Hi, you pretty much said it. I'm Bailey Elizabeth. I am the author of V is for Violet, V is for Venice, soon to come the third book in the series Hit, and a whole bunch of other nonsense. So, yeah.
You also have a new book that is ongoing on Neovel, which is Super Slice, and which I highly recommend. You actually have a lot of books that I would highly recommend and that are also available on our platform, and which are very diverse because one thing that I've noticed is that your writing themes or genres are pretty diverse. They can go from like dark storylines with a comic undertone to pure horror, and I think that you know what book I'm referring to. But I wanted to ask you if there was any sort of core inspiration behind your stories.
I would have to say if I had to pick one core inspiration to encompass all of my stories, I would probably have to say my dreams. I have crazy vivid dreams, and I'll dream about a scene in a book and wake up with a whole idea in my head. And that's where Sleepless Skies came from. I had a dream about a friend and I going out and partying in New York City on New Year's Eve, and dragons showed up, and it was crazy. And I woke up, and there's a book idea there. So if I had to pick one thing that inspires a lot of my work, it would definitely be the weird dreams I have.
So was that also the case for the Rough Love series? What was the dream behind that story?
I had a specific dream about a conversation that they have sort of mid book that's a turning point in their relationship. And I woke up thinking about that. At the time, I was reading a lot of books in the same genre, which would be, I guess, romance, but subgenre, mafia romance kind of. And I was reading a lot of characters that were kind of helpless and like fell into the situations they were in. And I envisioned this heroine that put herself into that situation, that was there on purpose, that was just as badass as um, the lead male, you know? So there was a conversation that I dreamed about, and then I started thinking about that a whole lot, and the book idea was born from there. And then I accidentally wrote a sequel. Oops.
I'm glad you didn't respond that you had a dream about your family being murdered.
Yeah. I can't say that I've never had that dream before. I have 4 younger siblings that I am very protective of, so that also definitely played a part in the Rough Love series, specifically in Violet and Venice, of course. But you know.
Yeah, I do understand. I also have a younger sibling, so like I get the protective feeling. Like sometimes I feel like I'm the parent of my sister, which is a very weird feeling because I'm not.
Right. My sisters, my mom and my stepmom were pregnant at the same time. So my sisters are both 15 years younger than me. And so I was always very protective of them, but also my brothers, who are 20 and 16 now. Wow, that blows my mind. um, they were always like my buddies, my best friends and stuff. And I always was very protective and loved them dearly. So that definitely was a big fear that ended up in my book.
Well, I wanted to go back to what you said about your character being as badass as a lead male character. And I think it was something that I told you last time we spoke about the lead character in Sleepless Skies, and about how badass she was and how I would want to be as badass as she was. So where that question is going is that Um, do you identify with any of the characters that you wrote?
I definitely identify in some way with each of my characters. I don't think I've ever written a character that I would say is modeled after myself completely because um, I don't know. I like to fill in the flaws in myself a lot of times with my characters and express myself in ways that I can't necessarily in real life with through my characters. So, like, in my book, How to Find Love During the Apocalypse, it features my first queer main character, my character Valentine. She's bisexual, and um, writing her and coming up with her was a really big step in discovering my own bisexuality and coming to recognize that. And so each character I write is a journey and is a new discovering a different part of myself.
But that reminds me that today we posted a promotional Instagram post for an author who, just like you, also used her writing to sort of figure out things about herself, including about her sexuality. How did this sort of self-discovery path happen with your books?
Um, so for with the character Valentine that I was just talking about, I was starting to I didn't really grow up in a place where it was super safe to explore that side of myself. I grew up kind of in a conservative environment, and it was just kind of frowned upon. Not with everybody in my family and friends, of course, but just the general environment. And so I guess I was starting to explore that side of myself, and it really helped to then create a character who was already leaps and bounds ahead of where I was in her own discovery. She lost a loved one that that also deals with loss of loved ones. But Valentine was very far ahead of where I was in her own self discovery and in her own identity. And it helped me to write in that headspace and write in a character's voice that was already there, already out. Um, and then I was able to slowly come out myself as I explored her character. I'm not that far in that book because I have so many ongoing right now, but the she's very fleshed out to me.
You do have many ongoing books. I mean, I think there's also the third book of the Love series that is um, coming out soon. And there's also, as I said, Sleepless Skies, but you have a lot of series ongoing. How do you manage to write all those stories at the same time?
So it actually helps me to have multiple stories to work on because I will get stuck on one or fatigued, I guess. I don't really get writer's block. I know what I want to happen next, but I kind of get burnt out on certain stories or I'm not feeling particularly inspired to work on one. And so it helps me to bounce between a couple so that whenever I do get particularly burnt out on one story, then I can find inspiration in another. And then, by the time I'm a few chapters into that and I'm feeling a little bit burnt out, then I can switch back. So I actually have, if I tried to count, probably 6 or 7 ongoing novels right now, which is too many, but that's how it happened.
So I'm assuming that among those 6 or 7 books, some of them are unpublished, right?
Yes. So specifically, Hit, I am editing right now to publish and put on Neovel, and I'm very excited for that. I've got a beautiful cover and everything made. Editing is just so hard, but then of my other ongoing books, I think they're all being actively posted to Neovel right now. So I've got Sleepless Skies, I've got Skins and Needles, which is almost finished. I've got How to Find Love During the Apocalypse. I've got His Unexpected. And then, yeah, I think those are my 4 ongoing right now. I do have 2 trilogies that I'm working on in the background that I'm not posting anywhere, but except for Patreon, kind of. I
Oh,
can't
that's
say
very exciting.
actively, but whenever I do finish a chapter, it goes there. I take off more than I can chew, but I need a lot to bounce between.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't be able to write 2 trilogies at the same time, so like I wouldn't know.
I can't even write 2 trilogies at the same time. That's why one has like 7 chapters and one has 3.5.
But you actually managed to know what the ending of each story is gonna be?
Yeah, so whenever I get a story idea, I typically get the overarching start to finish in my head all at once. So I kind of know where they're headed. I say that for the most part, but sometimes I will accidentally get a sequel idea, which is the case with His Unexpected. That was supposed to be a standalone novel, and I definitely have a sequel planned. So um, I know how that one's going to end, but then I just came up with a whole story for after that book. But typically, yes, I do know how stories are going to end. You usually know who's going to make it to the end of the story and stuff like that. So, yeah.
And is there a specific process that you go through when you're writing?
Not necessarily. I kind of approach each book differently. For the rough love novels, I did not have an outline at all. For Violet and Venice, I just kind of wrote them. The second half of Venice, I wrote in about 2 weeks flat because I got an idea in the shower one day of how I wanted the book to end, and I wrote about 36,000 words in 10 days to finish that book. So that one, I had no outline. I had no real plan besides eventually so and so will end up with so and so. That was pretty much the only end goal I had at the time, and so that one was completely pantsed. However, for some of my newer books, because they require more world building, specifically Sleepless Skies, a vampire book that I was going to start until I got the idea for Sleepless Skies, I've got more solid outlines for those. Sleepless Skies, I've actually got outlined probably 16 chapters in advance. Um, but that's because I kept coming up with specific lines and stuff that I didn't want to forget. And so I ended up outlining that one a lot more than I have previously. So each book kind of gets its own approach, depending on How to Find Love in the Apocalypse During the Apocalypse has no outline either. It's there's no specific process I go by, I guess is what I'm trying to say. I approach everything dramatically differently. So that's probably not helpful to anybody who is looking for advice on a writing process, but you just kind of have to feel things out. Everything is its own situation.
I do think that it's quite useful because there are some people that will have as I said, a specific process, and other people who are going to write sort of stream of consciousness. So I think it really depends on what you're more comfortable with. And that actually reminds me of a question that I intended to ask you. Um, are you self-editing the last book of the Rough Love series, Hit?
Yes, I am self-editing it. I self-edited the first two. I'm actually an editor by day job, not novel editor, but I do proofing and editing and website writing and stuff like that. Um, so it's hard. It's really hard to self-edit something, and it takes so long, but a lot of people don't know about this wonderful feature in Word and Google Docs and stuff. I don't know if it's in Docs, but in Word that is called Read Aloud. And so that was really helpful when I discovered it. But before I learned that Word had a read aloud feature, I would read it aloud to myself. And that helps me catch so much. That's my biggest, if you are self editing, that's my biggest advice is read your book aloud. Or if you don't want to do that in your head, read it in a different accent or a different cadence or something. So, like, it helped me whenever I was editing Venice. I did this for most of Venice. I kind of read everything very as if it was text to speech, as if it was like Siri or Alexa or something reading it. So, like, that kind of weird robotic kind of voice. I read a lot of Venice when I was editing it in my head in that. So it changes the flow of how I would read it in my own voice and helps me catch a lot more errors and stuff. Well, hopefully all errors, of course, but yeah, that's a weird thing that I picked up during editing years ago when I first started trying to self-publish was to read it in a different voice that isn't your own, even sounding kind of unnatural because it forces you to listen to each word exactly as it is. So I find it very useful. And it's what a lot of editors in the official editing field use.
Are you editing fiction books in
Like,
your day job? I mean,
no, I don't edit books in my day job. I edit like designs and stuff. So it actually makes it very hard to read and enjoy reading sometimes because I have to be absolutely perfect in my day job when it comes to editing and proofing because I am like the final, I approve all art. I'm the final, I guess, catch all for anything mistakes on either production end or design end. And so it makes it kind of hard to pleasure read sometimes because I'm focusing on each word very as if I was looking at a design or as if I was trying to edit. Like, I don't mind typos in books. I read a lot of web novels and stuff, which are a lot of people's first drafts. Um, but my brain just reads everything super, super, super slowly because I focus very minutely on each word. So that's fun.
so I wanted to ask you about well, your experience with the publishing of the Rough Love series, which I think is sort of an experience, a dual experience with online and traditional publishing.
So the Rough Love series is indie published. I self-published Violet and Venice and my other book, Chapter One. I have experience with the traditional publishing industry. I've done the querying process and had full manuscript requests and stuff, but it is really long and arduous. And I do have books that I still want traditionally published, but I also really enjoyed the self publishing process. I really enjoyed having my book out there. Basically, I don't know. So somebody, this is going a little bit on a tangent, but a short tangent. Somebody asked me where I got my beta readers once, and I don't ask for beta readers specifically, but I like being able to post my work online because my readers, will comment, and it lets me see things that people have problems with, certain characters, how they act, certain scenes, and stuff like that. And so I really enjoyed the process of putting my work online and growing a reading community that I was really interactive with and stuff. Whenever it comes to commenting and talking to the people reading my books. And then from there, taking it and editing completely the book and then self-publishing it. I just really enjoyed that process too. Um, it feels personalized. Traditional publishing can feel very lonely because you basically have this book that you've written completely. And while some people, I'm sure, post their books online and then query, it's not the norm. So it can be very lonely, not feeling like you have that audience backing you, like you have that reader base, behind you when publishing traditionally. So I really like the community aspect of at least how I did self-publishing, which was, putting the book out there and then just publishing it later.
Have you made any changes based on the feedback that you were getting from people who read your books?
Some, yes, I have. Some I wish that I'd had certain feedback I wish I'd had whenever I was self-publishing initially that I didn't get for a couple years later that I would probably make some changes based on that, but I just didn't have it at the time. Um, I definitely would and will make changes based on my reader input in the future too. So I value that very much.
Where did you get this feedback? Usually on your Patreon?
My Patreon's very new. I only have one patron, so big sad. Um, so yeah, my Patreon doesn't contribute a whole lot to my creative process right now. I post all my chapters early on Patreon. I post all my cover reveals and design stuff early on Patreon. So it is a fun concept in theory. I just have not probably advertised it very well. So it's very small right now.
Yeah, advertising is a huge part of being an author. It's actually one of the topics of episode 2 of Neocast, which will be in French, and which is sort of about how before becoming an author, one of the things that you have to learn is that it's not easy to promote your book. The thing that the author I interviewed said was that writing the book was the easy part, and it's the actual promotion, the self promotion of yourself as an author and of the book itself is your hardest part.
I would agree with that. It is really hard. The writing field and self-promotion kind of demands social media, and social media is its own beast. It can be exhausting and emotionally taxing, especially when you post something book promotional or writing related and it gets no traction, which happens a lot on social media. People just won't log on at the right time. The algorithm will place your tweet, below a lot of others. Or Instagram. The writing community is strange. And fluctuates in activity a lot. So social media can be extremely taxing whenever you put yourself out there and don't get hits. And it makes it really hard to then continue to work on that self promotion because, um, it is hard. Basically, I would agree with the point that the self promotion is the hardest aspect of being a successful writer for sure. I find it hard myself too. So
yeah, that was what I was gonna ask you actually. I was gonna ask you if it was something that you were more familiar with now.
I have been doing it for a few years. I started my first writing Facebook page whenever I was like 14, I think. Back when I was posting to a different web novel site that is now dead. I have been doing it for a long time, but that doesn't necessarily make the emotional aspect of it easier. That doesn't necessarily change the fact that some days you just don't get any interaction, and that can be a real bummer. You got to just keep going with it. You know, you have to just keep promoting yourself and pushing out content and trying, because if you don't, you know, you miss all the shots you don't take, or whatever, however the saying goes. But it is really hard, even whenever you do have experience doing it. You know, even whenever I have been putting my stuff online for years and trying to promote it and stuff, it doesn't necessarily get easier. You just get more familiar with it.
Do you have any tips for people who are trying to self-promote?
What has helped me a lot in recent years, well, I guess mainly this past year, since I met a lot of my writer friends on Neovel, it really helps to build a web of other writers to have your back and support you. You know, they're doing the same thing as you, they're having the same struggles, and they're not your competitors. You know, there's not a finite amount of readers and people wanting to read. Um, so definitely my biggest tip is to build a support web of other writers. My Neovel writing friends are my favorite people on in the whole world. They're so supportive and so sweet, and so helpful whenever it comes to not only self promotion. You know, they're they have my back in that department too. Um, you know, retweeting each other's stuff, but also being able to talk about the struggles you're going through as a writer, and being able to talk about how hard it is sometimes to make a splash. And you know, I would definitely say that has helped me immensely.
And how do you build that network if you're an introvert? I feel like a lot of writers and people in general are very introvert, despite showing people their work.
um, I'm an introvert myself. I'm highly introverted. It's probably why I can't string together a solid sentence to save my life. But it really helps. That's the nice thing about social media and the internet. Um, it makes it very easy to find these communities and stuff online. Like Neovel has the Discord and stuff. But I know other sites probably have something similar. I just am really only active in this one anymore. Um, it's easier to talk to people when you don't have to talk to people. You know, whenever you don't have to be in the same room as someone, trying to sound like a normal person talking and stuff. It's nice to be able to type your feelings and have those conversations kind of behind the safety of a screen. So that at least has made it a lot easier for me. I don't have to, you know, go out and meet people face to face, which granted, this past year it wouldn't have been all that practical anyway. It's nice to be able to hang out in these spaces online with like minded people and not worry about being weird or, you know, different or quirky or whatever. It's nice to be able to talk to people in that quiet online space.
Speaking of support, were you able to get that support from people around you, your family, your friends?
Somewhat, I would say. My grandmothers have always been my biggest fans. If we're talking family specifically, my mom's always been very encouraging, but she's not a huge reader of my works, which is fine. You know, I don't expect family and friends to read my books just because I wrote them. I want them to read them if it's a genre or a story they think they would enjoy, because otherwise neither of us are doing each other any favors, you know? So My mom's very supportive, but it's not. She will buy my books, but she doesn't necessarily always read them. My late grandmother was my biggest supporter ever. She was a writer too, and so she really taught me a lot about the writing world and the publishing industry and stuff. And then I've got a couple very supportive friends. My original critique partner was one of my biggest supports in the world. She actually ended up being a bridesmaid in my wedding. And then my friend from high school, who is also a writer, she's a fantastic fan fiction writer. I absolutely adore her work. She's also one of my biggest supporters. But that equals, maybe 4 or 5 people in my actual real life. It's hard to get support from the people around you because people are busy, and I don't know why. I don't know if everybody has the same experience as I do with whenever it comes to support with people in your real life and stuff. Um, I don't know if that's as an experience across the board, but at least for me, I find it, pretty limited. A couple
And
people are like superpower supporters, and then the rest of the people are just kind of there.
yeah, I don't know if people are that supporting of jobs like being an author or being an artist.
Hmm.
Those kind of jobs that are not very safe financially speaking.
Hmm. The
Um,
arts in general. Um, I don't know if people are all that supportive. I just don't know. It's hard because a lot of people expect artists and writers to put their stuff out for free, which I like to put content out for free, of course, too, because I want my stuff accessible to a lot of readers, but also it's unfair for people to expect writers and artists and stuff to not get paid for their work because it is hard. Creativity is a burden. It is a huge process to complete a book or even a chapter or a painting or anything. And it can be difficult gathering support when a lot of people expect that kinds of stuff for free,
yeah,
I
and I
guess.
hope I hope that you don't mind me asking how your late grandmother's experience was like in as an author.
So her experience was a lot of people's experience, which was difficult. She wrote so many fantastic stories, but the querying world and trying to find an agent and getting traditionally published is really difficult, and it's a hard process, and nobody who is trying to go through that process should be feel bad for hitting walls and stuff because it is a really difficult environment. It's a very subjective field. And so she had short stories that she was very active with trying to get published, and she was in a lot of writing groups and stuff, but she was met with a lot of those challenges too. But she was very supportive of me also pursuing that. So she actually took me to get my first book that I ever wrote notarized and stuff. Like that was something that she had learned was very important. It's not really it's not a necessary thing anymore so much, but it was just a really special thing to be able to go and do with her.
Did she eventually manage to get published?
I think she had a short story published in an anthology. Um, I'm not sure outside of that. She was very active in her family and the church and stuff. My grandfather was a minister, and So she didn't have a whole lot of time to dedicate to that also. She has like 30 something great grandkids, um, amongst or from her four kids. And so she was just such an inspirational figure in our family, also outside of writing. And so she didn't have a whole lot of time to dedicate to the querying process and stuff. I have all her short stories. Um, I am very slowly compiling them into a short works collection to publish, and all the proceeds will go to her favorite charities and stuff. So that's my own personal journey. It's taken me a long time because I was, she passed away in 2019. And so it's been a long recovery from losing her as well. So it's taken me a while to get back into being able to go through her writing and put that together.
And was her writing style similar to yours?
Not in any way.
Well,
She wrote children's short stories primarily, and I write adult, new adult, occasional YA. Well, I started with YA, but have moved since. Um, Novels and series and stuff. I write much like, well, I also write short stories too, but I don't write short children's stories. I write short horror stories. So the similarity in our writing and starts and ends with writing. But that did not take away in any way from her support. She was always just insanely supportive.
and will you never write any children's book?
I don't know. My mom also has written a few children's books that she has aspirations to publish. So been I've brainstormed and stuff and talked her through her idea process. But I don't know if I could necessarily do it myself. I don't know. That's an interesting question. I don't know if I'll ever. Maybe if I ever have children, which is a huge maybe, if I ever have my own children, maybe I will write stories for them, but I don't know that I will ever. Otherwise, I just don't know that that's necessarily my calling.
I could actually see you write a horror story for children. Like,
I could if I
yeah,
wanted
sort
to
of like
scare little
Halloween
kids.
story,
As a kid, I read a lot of like these scary stories compilations, scary horror story anthologies, scary tales to tell in the dark, something or another. Um, Whatever. There's like so many variations of the short and scary tales kinds of books. I read a lot of that as a kid, so maybe I would write something geared that way. Granted, I don't know if those were necessarily kids' stories I was reading. I just happened to read them as a kid, so I don't know. Maybe.
Speaking of your childhood, and I don't know if anyone had picked that up, but you talked about having a Facebook account, a writing Facebook account at the age of 14, which makes me wonder, when did you start writing?
So I wrote a lot of stories in elementary school, like short stories and stuff. I would submit to like poetry contests within my school. Uh, my first novel I started the summer before seventh grade. Um, I was hanging out with one of my closest childhood friends, and we heard one of the eighth graders refer to the incoming seventh graders as Sevies. And so we changed that and turned it into Zevies and then made a whole series about it. And it currently sits in the cemetery document of my Google Drive. I don't delete anything I write, which I think is not typical from what I've heard talking to other writers and stuff. I've heard a lot of people talk about deleting old bad stories or their first novel or whatever. I don't delete anything I write because I feel like everything is part of my history as a writer and my growth as a writer. So I can look at what I write now compared to my first book that I wrote at 12 and see how far I've come. And I like being able to, have that. I like being able to look back on my past work and see all the progress that I've made and all the time I've put into growing this craft. So
Yeah,
my first book was written at 12, I guess, to go back to the actual question.
yeah, that's actually surprising that you didn't delete anything. Like, I know, like, from my personal experience, I could never keep what I wrote when I was a teenager because that was far from being good, really. So, like, looking at it actually makes me cringe because, like, sometimes I will stumble upon, like, notes, like, an idea for a book and actually cringe. I'm like, really, like,
Just physically like, oh.
I actually started writing it was a fantasy novel in a book it was not a book, it was actually more like a very like dense notepad. Started writing a story and ripped off all the pages when I realized I was basically rewriting Harry Potter.
Oh no. I saw something, I don't know if it was on Twitter or something else, some writing page saying that everyone's first novel is just a fan fiction of all their favorite novels combined into one. And if I look back on my own first book, I would say that's pretty true for me at least. So I think that's a fairly normal um, assess or a fairly normal process people go through.
So, what was your favorite book when you were a child?
I don't think I can pick a specific favorite book. Um, and it's hard for me to name favorites sometimes when a lot of books that I read and really connected with have been um, long since I don't know what's happened to them web series and stuff. I do read a lot online and have historically read a lot online because I like to read in the spaces that I write. And so it's not always easy to name that stuff. I did really like, I believe her name was Mary Downing Hahn. She was a horror writer, but wrote a lot of like middle grade and YA aged horror. And I really liked a lot of that as a kid. And then I've read, obviously, a lot of books since then. I've read many books. I just can't pick a favorite.
So, as of now, you still don't have any favorite book? As an adult, I mean.
I have got like a lot of books that I would recommend. I don't know if I have a specific favorite. Um, it's gonna sound really depressing because the book is really depressing, but one of my favorites was Cormac McCarthy's The Road. It's a very bleak and depressing book, but what I really liked about it was it broke a lot of writing rules. It broke a lot of boundaries and stuff, I guess, that you see in normal writing, structural boundaries. And it was a lot more freeform and didn't go by the same like hard grammar rules that were, nailed into our brains from a young age. It broke a lot of it was very much creatively written outside of normal bounds, and I really enjoyed reading that. And seeing that, yeah, you can kind of do whatever you want. There are no rules. And I very much live by that now. Whenever it comes to my writing, or anytime there's some new crazy discussion in the writing community about the right way to do this or that, um, I very much live by the lawless viewpoint of there are no rules. You can kind of do whatever you want. It's good to know the rules so that you can effectively break them, but you don't have to follow the norm whenever it comes to writing at all. There is no norm. Anarchy.
Yeah, I feel like that's actually the case, like not the anarchy part, but the fact that there are like lesser rules. Writing is becoming more diverse in terms of themes, but also in terms of style. But has any book influenced your personal writing style?
I'm really not sure. Besides The Road, because I did really like the breaking of the norm in terms of style. I really enjoyed Handmaid's Tale. Not necessarily for the once again for the story. I also, love The Handmaid's Tale from start to finish the book. But stylistically, Margaret Atwood is just very sharp. She packs a lot of messages into every line she writes. A lot of snarkiness and just voice into her writing. And so I would say, if I had to pick another one, probably that.
Yeah, and actually, the first time that I read The Handmaid's Tale was maybe like 3 years ago. And when I read it, I didn't know that it was not a new book. I didn't know when it was published. And I felt like it was so relevant, like she has a way of writing that is very, that just goes beyond time limits,
Yeah,
And
I really enjoy that aspect of her writing for sure. I would like to someday be someone's writing inspiration. I think I'm a pretty long way from that, but I'm trying.
in a way, we're all influenced by what we see and what we read, that at some point you might well influence someone without that person knowing.
Oh, that's true. Oh my goodness. I was very recently talking about something similar to what you just said, in terms of everything that you read or hear influences you in some way, whether consciously or subconsciously. And I was thinking about that just in terms of certain ideologies and not wanting to expose yourself to them, even if you disagree with them, because you're still exposing yourself to negative thoughts and stuff. And that does make its way in, whether you consciously want it to or not, or whether you're fighting it or not. Like, that kinds of stuff really does have an impact on you. And so you should try and surround yourself with positivity.
Oh yeah, you can't be neutral with everything that is around you. That's totally impossible.
Mm-hmm.
Like, because we as human beings have emotions, and it's literally impossible to be faced with something and not feel anything.
Yeah. So that's why I think it's important to surround yourself with positive people, the kinds of messages that you want to put out in the world. You should surround yourself with to kind of not only be, positive to your mental health, but also so that that negativity doesn't seep in, you know? It's hard not to let some things seep in, of course, you know, we live in a society. um, we're very affected by our surroundings, and of course, things are going to impact us whether we want it to or not. But we can make an effort to try and keep only positive things whenever it is within our control. Yeah.
But not to play the devil's advocate, but at the same time, I feel like those negative things that surround us can also prompt creativity.
Oh, definitely. Of course, like a lot of sad things happen in my writing. I wouldn't say I write tragedy or anything like that, but you know, hard things do happen to characters, and without having felt those kinds of emotions myself, I don't know that I would have been able to accurately portray them in my writing. So it is important to feel the full spectrum of human emotion and to have that full experience. I would agree. Yeah.
Yeah, I also agree. I feel like it's very difficult to write something that you're not familiar with or have never experienced yourself. I know that one of my book ideas was something about writer's block that was based on the fact that the main character that was an aspiring writer couldn't write anything because that person didn't have any experience in life. And that was based on my personal experience in life. Like, I've never been drunk, and like, how can I write what it feels like to be drunk? Not that it was like the core.
Right. That's just an example.
But yeah, I feel like when you're
I
an
think that would make
author,
a really
like,
interesting story. You should write that.
I should. Well, it's one of those book ideas that I totally gave up on because I wasn't. I was at a time when I was not sure that that was for me. So
Do
yeah.
you still feel how do you feel about writing now? Not to flip the interview.
But that's fine. It's gonna be a very short answer. How I feel about it is that I'm inspired to do it, but it's more like I'm inspired to start, but like I still have to like find the right idea because I have so many and it's so hard to just like pick one and start.
I understand. That's why I have 7 books I'm actively working on.
Yeah, I mean, when you're like filled with
I'm
ideas,
not
like
going to pick.
yeah, you're not going to pick, and that's great because that's working for you, you know.
I wouldn't recommend it, but yes.
I wouldn't recommend it as well because that's a lot, and as you said, you've been burned out because you had like, but like there was also a way for you to like overcome the burnout that you were feeling.
Yeah, it helps to have multiple things to work on for that. I know a lot of my burnout also will correlate with like difficult mental health days. Creativity is so intertwined with mental health that like it's hard sometimes to write whenever my brain's in shambles, of course. But having multiple projects helps to overcome some of that too.
Yeah, so it's sort of like a double-edged sword in a way,
Yeah.
having like so many ideas and like using them all at once.
It is. It's hard to jump between characters and voices and stuff. And obviously, I don't get books done as fast as if I could just write one and be really consistent and write on that one every day. It's not as easy to like complete a book whenever you're shuffling through a few at a time. But I couldn't see myself doing it any other way. I couldn't see myself working on just one project.
And do you actually write every day?
No, I definitely don't. I have my day job, but I also, do deal with a lot of mental health ups and downs. And some days I would like to write every day, but some days I sit down and the creativity just isn't there. The creative energy has already been expended on, anxiety or something, or,
Yeah, and it's definitely something that is quite frankly reachable. I feel like it's like very exhausting.
Yeah,
I'm pretty sure that people actually do it. That's really great. So
it's
I feel like
inspiring.
that's totally inspiring, but like for most people, it's very hard.
Yeah, unless writing is your full-time job, which I would love to work to that point. I would love to be able to write full-time, and have that be my sole source of income and financial stability. I did start with that stuff so young. I started querying when I was 14. I was on calls with agents when I was 14, and that was crazy. That was crazy young to be doing all of that, but I think it's definitely not, I don't know if in terms of success, but in terms of writing, I feel like it's been really helpful to have been doing it for so long, because once you finish your first novel, then oh, now I can do it again. And so starting early, I've completed probably, let me count on my fingers, like um 4, 5, 7, 8. I've completed probably in total 9 books since I started writing when I was 12. Um, and just having that experience has been really valuable.
Yeah, I actually realized that um, with getting to the writer community, that there are actually a lot of people who start writing very early, which was something that I didn't expect. I don't know why I started trying to, but I've never completed anything. But
A lot of people start writing late too. My grandmother, at least, she just didn't start writing her children's stories when she was in her 20s. Um, a lot of people start later in life. And there's no real right way to do things either. The value I put in my experience is not like greater than other people's experience. Like if you don't start writing until you're 30, but you spent those years gathering life experiences instead of writing, 3 books or whatever in that time, then you have something else you're bringing to the table that I don't. And there's no real right way to do anything, especially whenever it comes to an art. It's very subjective in terms of how people's creativity works, and also in terms of what people like. So you kind of just have to go with what you're feeling.
actually brings me to my last question, which is, do you have any writing memory or any anecdote about writing?
I like the one that I did use for Neovel, the where I said, if you can't find what you want to read, write it. I've been saying that since I started writing, because whatever. No, there's no because. I've been saying that since I started writing, and I still kind of live by it. I love to try and, so there's, every idea that's been thought of has already been thought of at this point. There's no true new idea out there, or there's no true true new concept. But I like to try and tell these concepts that exist and have existed for so long in new ways. And so I guess that goes back to the, if you can't find what you want to read, write it. because nobody has thought of that concept in the same way that you will think of it. I think Alice B. Sullivan, the other Neovel author, said something to that effect in one of her advice bits, where nobody has told the story you have in mind the way that you'll tell it. So you should write it, even if you think your idea is not that original. Well, it is, because nobody has thought of it from your lens before. Nobody has thought of it from your perspective and your frame of reference. And so, whether you think it's just the next same run of the mill fantasy or just Harry Potter rehashed or whatever, it's not going to be a carbon copy of something else if you're telling it from your eyes, from your brain, from your experiences and everything. Everything's going to be unique in that way. I'm so bad at
It's like
words.
perfect ending for this interview, I can tell you, because it's actually something that reminds me of our first episode, in which Erin was talking about how her book were very unique in the sense that it was something that she created and that no one else could have created, because it was really her, it was really like her creativeness, her ideas, and like the main character of her story, Midnight was also based on her, so that was really personal. So yeah, that's a very great advice. Well, not being an advice. Thank you for answering all those questions. Thank you for goofing around with me. I appreciate that a lot. And
I
you were
appreciate it too. It makes me feel a little bit better about being such a disaster human.